Chapter 29. Bryson parked next to an unfamiliar car, glancing between me and the car. Could be anybody. I frowned at my cutoffs and baggy t-shirt. I hadn't dressed for company.
Stay put.
Bryson did the bodyguard thing, looking for monsters hiding in the yard. The ice cream is melting. He ignored me. By the time he opened my door, I wanted to tell him to just take me to my apartment. One look at his face, and I decided not to test his patience. We walked through the front door, and I stopped short, causing Bryson to bump into me. Aaron sat at the kitchen table, enjoying a sandwich. I needed to tell him to stop dropping by unannounced. I had enough on my plate without worrying about him. Aaron? What are you doing here?
Hey, sorry to come by without calling, but I want to talk to you.
He stood. I shoved the ice cream into the freezer and turned. May, Dottie, and Bryson's constant presence crowded the room. If Aaron planned to discuss my conversation with Samuels, I wanted privacy. Outside?
No.
Bryson stood in front of the door. Would he stop us from leaving? Bryson! I'd had about all I could take of him for one day.
She's safe with me,
Aaron said. Bryson bowed his head and moved from the door. Thankfully, he remained quiet. May and Dottie exchanged a look. Neither seemed happy. I resolved to return to my apartment as soon as possible. I had no idea what had crawled into their tea, but the last thing I needed was another lecture. I marched out the door with Aaron on my heels. There's a reason people leave home when they're grown. Aaron nodded, his face as unreadable as Bryson's.
We need to talk.
We settled onto the porch swing at Dottie's, close enough to the house to appease Bryson and far enough away for privacy. Aaron wasted no time in getting to the point.
Why were you holding hands with Bryson in the diner?
I don't remember holding his hand. Samuels had tattled.
What's the scoop with Bryson? Why is he so protective?
I took a second to get my words in order before answering. The elders of the tribe asked him to keep me safe. Word about the break-in and the shootings got back to them, and they were worried.
He isn't your cousin?
Aaron leaned back. Not by blood. We're connected through the tribe and share a similar lineage. Cousin is the closest word I could think of to explain it.
Okay.
His jaw tensed. Samuel saw us and got the wrong idea. He told me to stay away from you. Aaron turned toward me.
I know. He thinks you were involved with the Rivera murder. Somehow, both cases are tied together. I told him you were a psychic.
My jaw dropped. Oh, God.
He took it better than I thought he would. He says he believes in mediums, but he still doesn't trust you.
Samuels believes in mediums? The idea of the detective having his cards read made me grin.
He's not as bad as he seems, Tessa. He's seen a lot. Not much surprises him anymore.
Okie dokie. Now what? I relaxed against the swing.
He agreed to take you to the crime scene.
He watched me as if gauging my reaction. Sure, I can do that if you're there. And Bryson. He'll flip if I go without him. He's taking the whole bodyguard thing pretty seriously.
Bodyguard.
Aaron said the word as if it were something foul. It's important to him.
What's the deal with your leg? Samuel said you didn't have a scratch.
I used a home remedy of May's. Fixed me up. I'd planned to put a bandage where the wound had been, but didn't have time. I heal fast, I guess.
Not like you could fake the injury in the hospital. Hell, I saw how badly it was bleeding after you banged it on the desk.
He leaned forward and looked over my calves, then shook his head.
Damn.
It was just a flesh wound. Aaron stared for a beat.
I'll let Samuels know you agreed to come.
I'm sure he'll be thrilled.
He's a good guy once you get to know him.
Aaron's shoulders relaxed as he leaned back. Does Samuels ever use his first name? I wrinkled my nose. Richard was fine, but the nickname that went along with it suited him much better.
Only his wife gets away with it.
Aaron kissed the tip of my nose. The sweet gesture reminded me of Charlie. Here, sitting on his porch swing. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. I pulled away and closed my eyes, trying desperately to keep my emotions under control.
Tessa?
Aaron took my hand.
What's the matter?
I swallowed the lump in my throat and shook my head. Charlie used to kiss my nose like that. Aaron draped his arm around me.
I wish I could tell you it will get better. Just the other day, a woman walked by me at the grocery store, and she was wearing the same perfume my mother wore. I had to go splash water on my face. It hit me so hard.
When do you want to go to the house? As soon as I changed the subject, I wish I could console him. He deserved someone who cared that his mother's death still hurt him. Normally, I was that kind of person. But right now, I needed the emotional wall between us. Aaron pulled his arm back.
We could go now. I just need to check in with Samuels.
Sorry I changed the subject so fast. I'm not ready to talk about it. If I start crying, I'll never be able to stop.
I get it. But sooner or later, you're going to have to let it out.
I know. Maybe when my life gets back to some semblance of normal. I'd spent enough years in psychology classes to know that my preferred coping mechanism was denial. Hell, I'd counseled countless clients to face their feelings. Perhaps that old saying about doctors making the worst patients was true for more than physical health. Aaron started to speak, but stopped and looked away. He pulled his phone from his pocket and called Samuels. I walked inside Charlie's house to give Aaron some privacy. It was peaceful inside and smelled like home. I wandered into the office and sat behind the desk. For the first time, I could read the handwritten labels on the glass jars and old coffee cans, herbs, plants, and a few things that made my stomach churn filled the jars. If being a medicine woman meant I'd have to collect bits and pieces from snakes and frogs, I didn't want the job.
Tessa?
Aaron stood in the doorway with a tentative look. Come on in. I rested my head against the leather chair. This is Charlie's office. Aaron nodded and stepped inside. His eyes changed from normal to detective as he looked over the shelves. I didn't worry about explaining the jars. He couldn't read them. Yet, something about the way he looked around made me nervous. Maybe in detective school they taught students how to make perpetrators nervous so they would spill their secrets. Is he going to meet us?
Yeah, he's wrapping up some stuff at home. We'll meet at the house in a couple of hours.
I turned my head. I'd agreed to go, but my nerves kicked in. All righty then. I hope this works.
If it does, it does.
Aaron moved to my side of the desk and captured my chin between his thumb and forefinger. I met his eyes. He smiled and brushed his lips across mine. Another of my less-than-healthy coping mechanisms kicked in. Distraction. I wrapped my arms around his neck and drew him down until he deepened the kiss. 1 minute, it was sweet and innocent. The next, it was a hot mess of tongues and urgency. Aaron gripped my sides, half lifting me from the chair. I stood, and we swapped places. I climbed into his lap, facing him. He moved his hands under my t-shirt while my hands tangled in his hair. I rolled my hips forward as he drew my lower lip between his teeth. Aaron lifted my shirt until we had to break the kiss for him to pull it off. Before the shirt hit the floor, he dipped his face into my shoulder and kissed a line from my collarbone to my breast. He met my eyes, as if asking permission. I nodded my consent. I needed this. I needed to lose myself in him and forget. My bra came off. I closed my eyes and focused on his hands moving over my body. He cupped my bottom as he ran his tongue over my breast. I deserved to feel something other than pain. I pushed my chest forward, and he closed his lips over my nipple. I tugged on his shirt until he eased back and pulled it over his head. Oh my God, he is gorgeous. He wrapped his arms around me and pulled my body against his. I knew he was built, but seeing him shirtless beat my expectations. Aaron kissed me before I had time to second-guess myself. I was batting above my average with Aaron, and I knew it. He slid his hands over my butt again, only this time he lifted me as he stood. I wanted to protest that he'd throw his back out from lifting me. Instead, I wrapped my legs around him and ignored my heart slamming against my chest. Aaron,
I got you.
He carried me to the bed and eased me down.
You're so beautiful. You remind me of that cartoon character. What's her name?
You mean Jessica Rabbit? Why did everyone equate me to a freaking cartoon?
Yeah, that's the one.
I turned toward him as he stretched out alongside me. I wished he'd crawled on top of me or had turned the bed down so I could hide under the quilt. He grinned when I reached for the button of his jeans.
You sure?
Aaron ran his hand down my chest. Yeah. Are you? I felt his certainty when fumbling with his zipper.
Absolutely. But hang on.
He pulled back, hopped up, and locked the door. On the way back to bed, he slid out of his jeans. Wow. I couldn't turn away. Aaron chuckled and made quick work of my cutoffs, slowing his pace as he ran his hands from my ankles to my hips. He looked me over, as if trying to decide where to touch. I blushed from my chest to my forehead. I hated feeling exposed and vulnerable. Aaron leaned in to kiss me, but I slid under the quilt.
Never figured you for a shy one.
Only in the bedroom. I pulled my panties off and dangled them on one finger.
Uh-huh.
He chuckled and buried his face into my neck. My breath hitched as he drew my skin between his teeth. Careful. I mark easily. He nodded slightly and dropped his head lower.
But you heal fast,
he murmured.
You're so hot.
One word struck me. Hot. I was hot. Not the sexy, beautiful kind of hot. Temperature hot. My body kicked off an abnormal amount of heat. Talk about a mood killer. He couldn't see my frown with his face between my breasts. Aaron, wait, I can't do this. I groaned and sat upright. We had to slow things down. No, I needed to run from the room into a cold shower. Would that raise too many questions or potential hurt feelings?
What? Wow. Okay.
He sat up and ran a hand through his short hair. I'm sorry, it's just...
You don't need to explain. It's too soon, in the wrong place, at the wrong time.
He turned his head and smiled. I didn't feel like smiling or talking. Thanks. He pulled his pants on.
Tessa, it's okay.
I nodded, sending up a silent prayer of thanks that I hadn't shifted and burned the bed to ashes with Aaron in it. Chapter 30. Aaron and I walked into May's house hand in hand. Bryson glared, and May gave us a hard look. She liked Aaron, but something upset her. Did she know what we'd done? My guilt got the better of me. I dropped his hand and moved to the stove to check on the beef stew. I felt like a coward leaving Aaron by the door, but when it came to my great-grandmother, it was every man for himself. May eased beside me.
Best be careful, Tessa Marie. There is one too many roosters in the hen house.
I turned to the two men sitting at the kitchen table. Of course they'd heard the whisper. May couldn't speak quietly. Tension visibly rose between Bryson and Aaron. I chewed on my lip, trying to think of something to say to smooth things over. In the end, I decided to go with distraction. Hope y'all are hungry. I immediately regretted speaking. I didn't mean to poke the skunk, but Aaron sighed and Bryson glared. I turned and pulled the dishes from the cupboard. Aaron stood and set the table. Not to be outdone, Bryson pulled the bread from the oven. He took his aggression out on the unsuspecting loaf, hacking it into chunks. I moved to Bryson's side. Samuels is meeting us at the victim's house in about an hour.
Us?
I need you to come along. I need to talk to you. I set my hand on his forearm and he turned toward me. Although the look he gave me made me shrink back, it didn't take a PhD to see a healthy dose of hurt beneath his anger.
Right.
Bryson scooted past me and took the soup kettle from May.
Let me help you with that. It looks heavy.
No one spoke during dinner. I picked at my food and pretended not to notice that it tasted like ashes. Dottie and May shared a couple of knowing looks, but kept their opinions to themselves. Sooner or later, they would share those opinions with me. Not a conversation I looked forward to. The men focused their attention on the food. It seemed as though they were competing to see who could eat the most. I hadn't liked it when they were friendly with each other, but I would have welcomed their teasing. May and Dottie abandoned me in favor of catching the early news. For a couple of soap opera fans, they sure headed for the hills when drama landed in their kitchen. I filled the sink as Aaron and Bryson cleared the dishes.
Tessa, you should try to calm down before we see Samuels.
Aaron set his hand on the small of my back.
We'll clean up.
Anger rolled off Bryson like heat rising from fresh asphalt. I had to put an end to this, though I didn't know how. A shower sounded pretty darned good, a few minutes away from the testosterone to clear my mind, but I didn't want to leave them alone. Thanks. I'll just go change clothes. I dried my hands and went into my room. The wind picked up outside and the bottles in the tree clinked together, adding to the melody of the wind chimes. I sat on the bed and stared at my reflection in the mirror. A set of dark eyes stared back from under the brim of a white cowboy hat. Bryson! Paralyzed, I couldn't tell if it was shock or something more sinister. I couldn't move. The amulet on my neck cooled, and I remembered the words from Charlie's book. Someone has to move. You have to go. You will go into the dark. You will hide in the day. I send you away back to where you were. Through paths not walked, with eyes not seeing, I send you. This is said. This will be. I continued chanting at the face in the mirror until a hand touched on my shoulder. My words faltered and I began again. Bryson slid his hand from my shoulder to my neck. The second his skin touched mine, power flared between us. The conjurer's eyes widened a fraction. A burning in my gut caused me to stumble over the words. I closed my eyes and began the spell for the third time. Bryson said the words along with me, only in his native tongue. The face in the mirror faded, and I thought it had worked. The mirror shattered, sending glass flying.
What the hell was that?
Aaron came into the room and took a step forward.
Tessa?
I'm all right. The tone of my voice betrayed me. I trembled as Bryson pressed me against his chest, putting his body between me and the ruined mirror.
She's bleeding.
Bryson carefully moved the larger glass shards from my lap and turned them face down on the bed. Aaron asked again,
What was that?
May and Dottie stood behind Aaron, both peeking around him to see me. Dottie ducked into the bathroom and returned with a first aid kit. May guided Aaron from the room. Dazed, he followed her to the kitchen. I met Bryson's eyes and motioned to the other room. His jaw tensed and he shook his head. His eyes held an unspoken warning. I frowned and called to Aaron. It was a ghost, and a pretty angry one.
I saw it,
Aaron called from the kitchen. Bryson nodded his approval and took the first aid kit from Dottie.
Go rinse off. None of the cuts are deep enough for stitches. I'll clean up.
Aunt Dottie, will you sit with me in the bathroom? I felt foolish for asking. Could you cover the mirror? Dottie smiled and smoothed my hair back from my forehead. Of course. I stepped into the shower with Dottie sitting on the toilet beside me. The quietness between us unsettled me for two reasons. First, I couldn't help but feel I'd disappointed my aunt. Second, I needed reassurance that the woman on the other side of the curtain was still my aunt and not possessed by a skinwalker. Dottie, I'm here, darling. Bryson told me it is forbidden for a shifter to date a regular human. Is that true? I lathered a rose-shaped soap. It is. I peeked from behind the curtain. Because of situations like just now? Dottie nodded. I was allowed to marry Charlie because I already knew about shifters. It wasn't easy being around all that magic. Sometimes I wished I didn't know what I knew. It's a lot to take in, human or not. Yes, but you have no choice. It is a part of you. He doesn't have to carry your burden. If you share it with him, he might resent you for it later. I know you're right, but it doesn't make it any easier to swallow. I ducked behind the curtain. Tessa, your life will always be filled with danger and secrets. Aaron is a police officer. He won't be easy to lie to. It's not easy being a liability to the one you love. I imagine it will be harder for a man like Aaron to accept. I wrapped a towel around myself and pulled the curtain back. You weren't a liability. Charlie loved you. Dottie gave me the same patient smile she had when I was young. She wouldn't tell me how to live my life directly. Unlike May, Dottie offered softer advice. She gave just enough nuggets of wisdom to make me think, and to allow me to sort it out on my own. In times like these, I wanted a more direct approach. Bryson knocked and called my name.
Tessa, I need to talk to you.
Come in. Bryson nodded to Dottie before turning to me.
We need to work a spell of forgetting on Aaron. He's pretty shaken up and asking too many questions.
We can do that? Make him forget? I squeezed my hair in the towel.
Yup. An hour or two at the most. Any more than that, and it gets more complicated.
An hour or two meant I could erase more than just his memories of the mirror. Was that what Bryson suggested? Could I make Aaron forget about the almost sex? Should I? I don't want to mess with his mind.
You may not want to, but that is exactly what you're doing.
I pressed my lips into a thin line, more frustrated than angry. Once again, I didn't know what to do.
The spellbook is on your bed. Open to the page.
Brasson turned to leave, as if we'd settled the matter. Wait, is it permanent? We do this and he wakes up in my room with no idea how he got there? I shook my head. That seems wrong on so many levels. Brasson narrowed his eyes and lowered his voice to a growl.
What is wrong is involving an outsider in this battle. You have made him a target.
How will taking his memory make him less of a target? Dottie cleared her throat. Brasson is right, Tessa. Take away everything after you stepped into the bedroom. Not earlier? I spoke before I thought the better of it. Brasson gave me an unfriendly look.
If there's something you regret doing, by all means.
I'll give y'all some privacy. Dottie slipped out of the bathroom. I tightened the towel around my chest and stepped out of the tub. I had to turn sideways to get past Brasson, but still I brushed against him. He hung his head and muttered something under his breath. I ignored him and threw some clothes on. I pulled my suitcase from under the bed and threw my clothes inside. Once packed, I peeked at myself in a shard of mirrored glass. I had a small cut above my brow, half an inch lower, and I would have needed a trip to the emergency room. I was lucky. I'm not okay messing with his memories. I know it's a risk, but I'm not going to do it. Brasson frowned.
It's your call.
Let me talk to him. If he freaks out, then we'll do the spell. Brasson opened the door and Aaron stepped inside the room. He looked at the ruins of the mirror and tensed. I reached for his hand. Aaron, it was just a ghost. It happens to me sometimes. Aaron asked,
Will that happen at the victim's house?
I don't know. Aaron nodded and looked between me and Brasson.
Were you two speaking Cherokee?
Were we? I didn't know I spoke Cherokee. I quirked a brow at Brasson and he nodded. It happens when we're stressed out. Are you feeling better, Aaron?
Yeah. Sorry about that. It's not every day you see a ghost.
Brasson moved to my side and touched my arm, and power flared between us.
We should go.
Chapter 31. The drive over was by far the most uncomfortable 15 minutes of my life. Aaron followed in his own car, leaving Brasson and me alone.
You should have done the forgetting spell,
Brasson said. He's fine.
We'll see. If you get excited and shift...
I have it under control. I didn't believe for a second I had it under control, but I didn't want to talk about it.
Deep breathing helps. If you feel yourself slipping, take my hand. I can help.
I said I have it under control.
I felt your energy change when you and Aaron were at Dottie's.
I turned to face him. What do you mean you felt my energy change?
You almost lost it.
He pulled into the driveway behind Aaron. But I didn't. I reined it in before I lost control.
Try to keep your clothes on around Aaron until you get used to your new powers.
Brasson opened the door. Samuel stepped out of an unmarked police cruiser when Brasson got out of the car. Aaron grasped Samuel's shoulder and smiled. Aaron and Samuel's had an easy friendship, like mine and Haley's. I climbed from the car beside Brasson, and the mood changed. Samuels hooked his thumbs around his front pockets and rocked back on his heels. I expected Brasson to glare. Instead, he grinned. Samuels must have taken the grin as a challenge because he took a step toward Bryson. Aaron turned and strode to the front door, breaking the tension, but not before Samuels gave me a dirty look. I whispered to Bryson, "Stop it."
I didn't do anything.
Bryson chuckled under his breath. Evidently, he'd won the standoff. I'd never understand men. All the psychology classes in the world couldn't explain their behavior. The entire exchange irritated me. I marched into the house and stopped inside the foyer. To my left was a family room, and to my right was the kitchen. I turned to leave when Bryson whispered into my ear,
"Breathe and focus."
I nodded and caught Aaron and Samuel staring at us. "Am I allowed to touch things?" Samuels made a sweeping motion.
"Have at it."
Aaron added,
"The scene has been processed. Touch whatever you want."
Samuels coughed and pulled Aaron into the hall. The two whispered back and forth, their voices too low to make out what they were saying. I guessed I was the topic of conversation. I took a centering breath and stepped into the kitchen. When nothing happened, I tried to relax. Unsure of how to go about this, I ran my fingertips over the granite countertops and caught bits and pieces of images of the technicians dusting for prints. I touched the refrigerator door. Nothing. From the vision, I knew the killer had opened the cabinet under the sink. I caught a flash of black leather when I touched the knob. I called to the detectives, "Did he wear gloves?" Their conversation had grown louder, but I'd tuned them out. "Aaron, did you find prints here?"
"No, not in the kitchen."
I wrapped my hand around the knob and opened the cabinet door. I saw the killer reach for a garbage bag. I set a box of black heavy-duty trash bags on the counter. The earlier vision had fizzled out after the killer pulled out a trash bag. I turned and touched the hot water spigot. The reflection in the faucet shifted, and I saw blonde hair. With my eyes closed, a distorted face came into my mind. When I reached for the soap, I knew he'd touched it, but I couldn't read anything more. "This is frustrating," I whispered to Bryson as my fingers trailed over the stainless steel sink. "I keep catching blurry images, like here, in the sink. I see hair color, but can't make out the features." I remembered the mirror in my bedroom and the nearly perfect reflection in the knife. On a whim, I placed my hand flat against the window above the sink. Images flashed through my mind at a dizzying speed. I grabbed the countertop to keep from losing my balance. "Whoa!"
"Are you all right?"
Bryson put his hand on the small of my back. "I think it has to do with reflective surfaces." I rose to my tiptoes and touched the pots and pans hanging from a rack above the stove. The moment I touched them, I saw the murder scene from a higher angle. Still blurry, but it was there. I ran to the kitchen door and placed both hands on the small window. I closed my eyes and watched the young mother die. Everything in me screamed to remove my hands from the window, but I held on until the murderer left the kitchen. Something wasn't right. The little girl was still there, beside her mother. "Oh, my God!" I staggered back and pressed my back against the refrigerator. Samuels and Aaron came into the kitchen. While Aaron looked hopeful, Samuels was still hostile. At least I had their attention. "He wore black leather gloves. He killed her there." I pointed to the floor. "He hit the boy because he was screaming. Took a garbage bag out of the cabinet. There." I pointed to the open cabinet under the sink. "He took his gloves off and washed his hands." I paused to collect my thoughts.
"Is that all you got?"
Samuel sounded irritated. "No, He took his shoes off, stuck them in the bag, and went down the hall. I followed the path the murderer had taken. What did he do in here? I pressed my hand to the hallway mirror. It gave me a good profile shot, and I knew I could pick the killer out of a crowd. I found nothing in the guest bedroom or hall bath. In the pink bedroom, I caught more images. He took clothes from this dresser. The nursery didn't have any reflective surfaces other than the window. I pressed my hand to the window and caught glimpses of the murderer taking clothes from the drawer. Here, too, he took clothes and a blanket. I walked into the hall and hesitated. Where did he go next? I turned right and went into the master bedroom. I touched the mirror above the dresser. Did you guys take a computer from the desk? Samuel shook his head.
There was no computer.
I frowned and closed my eyes. He did something on the computer. I can't see if he took it, but someone did. The men followed me to the master bath and crowded the doorway. I think he stole a pair of shoes? I can't see what he's carrying from this angle. Was anything missing? I turned to see 3 stunned faces. Aaron's jaw hung open, Samuel stared dumbfounded, and even Bryson was wide-eyed. I bet it was shoes, I said. I knew I shouldn't enjoy their discomfort, but for the first time since Charlie had died, I felt useful. Maybe being different wasn't so bad. Maybe. I pushed past them and walked downstairs. He wrapped the boy in a blanket and left through this door, carrying a trash bag and the boy. The little girl followed him out. She knew him. I put my hands on my hips and smiled. Sure, I gloated, but I'd earned it. My cockiness didn't last long. I caught movement from the corner of my eye and turned. I stood face to face with Mrs. Rivera's spirit. Stunned, I didn't notice the anger in the spirit's expression until she landed a punch in the center of my face. Before that moment, I didn't believe a ghost could break someone's nose. The sickening crunch and fountain of blood changed my mind. I'm so sorry. Please, I'm trying to help. I leaned forward to keep the blood from running down the back of my throat. Tell us his name so we can find your kids. Samuels drew his gun and moved from one window to the next in search of something tangible that could have caused the injury. Bryson on one side, Aaron on the other. The 2 men shielded me from the invisible attacker. I craned my neck to see the spirit, but she was gone. Aaron eased me to the floor while Bryson searched the drawers for a dish rag. It was probably against the rules, stealing dish rags from a victim's house. Then again, a so-called psychic getting punched in the nose by the victim's ghost wasn't likely to be listed in the police policies and procedures manual. I'd blew it. I could have gotten a name. My voice sounded ridiculous. My nose throbbed, but my injured pride hurt much more.
You made contact. She may reach out to you again.
Bryson held the towels in place until I winced and held them myself.
Are you all right?
Aaron shook his head.
That was crazy. No shit. Even the ghosts don't like your girlfriend.
Samuels burst out laughing. I bristled until Aaron and Bryson laughed. Being the butt of a joke wasn't the worst thing that could happen. Not when it took the haunted look from Aaron's eyes. Chapter 32. I woke in my own bed. For a few precious moments, I forgot the wreck my life had become since Charlie died. His absence had left a hole inside me that I couldn't face. I nuzzled into my pillow and winced. My face hurt like hell. I walked into the hall and paused. Bryson slept on the fold-out couch, snoring. Thankfully, I didn't have to deal with him before I had coffee. I splashed water on my face and patted my nose. My reflection made me gasp. With a broken nose and 2 black eyes, I resembled one of the Walking Dead.
You should shift and heal your face.
Bryson's voice startled me. For such a big guy, his stealth unnerved me. I don't want to shift.
Why?
I just don't.
Shift for a few minutes, then change back.
He shrugged. He used my toothpaste, but had brought his own toothbrush. The intimacy of sharing personal things made me cranky. I don't want to burn my apartment down. He spit, rinsed, and spit again.
So don't light up.
Right. Why didn't I think of that?
Tessa, stop being pig-headed and shift.
I'm afraid to, okay? I'm not in control of myself when I shift.
The more you practice, the more control you'll have.
I made a face and walked out. He stayed in the bathroom, doing God knows what. I wanted to smack him upside his head. I went back to my room and locked the door, checking it twice before I stripped out of my pajamas. I tried to find the tiny ball of fire in my gut, but the more I tried to shift, the more it frustrated me. It was like trying to pick a piece of fruit from a tree just out of reach. No matter how far I stretched, I couldn't get a grip on it. This is ridiculous, I said out loud. He's supposed to be teaching me how to do this crap. I threw on my bathrobe and marched into the living room. I can't do it. Bryson emptied the contents of my coffee pot into his mug.
Do what?
Did you just take all the coffee?
Yeah, it's only 2 cups. I'll make more.
Forget it. I turned and stormed back into my room, slamming the door hard enough that something fell off a shelf in the living room. It occurred to me that my passive aggressiveness was out of control, but whose wouldn't be given my situation? My life was upside down. I had powers I didn't understand, and I was in so much danger that I had a bodyguard. I gave in to my frustration and crawled back into bed, pulling the comforter over my head and curling into a ball. Haley and Scott expected me for our usual after-church brunch date. I thought I should start reviewing case files for my new job. I need to follow up with Aaron about the investigation. I can't stand the thought of that innocent father spending another night in jail. I should pick up May's medications and check in with the ladies. My to-do list had no end, but none of that mattered. I closed my eyes and let the weight of Charlie's death crush me. My cell phone vibrated on the nightstand. The voice inside my head told me to check to see who was calling. I ignored it. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. I reached for it and frowned at Aaron's number on the screen. Nope, not ready for that. I sent Haley a quick text excusing myself from brunch and turned the phone off. I can't do this without you, I whispered into my pillow. No one answered. Had I expected Charlie to answer? Why couldn't I see him if I could see other spirits? I'm so angry with you. How could you lie to me and leave us in so much danger? I wanted to scream and break something, to throw a fit like a toddler. More than anything, I wanted to cry. Only the tears wouldn't come, even though my throat felt like it had swollen shut and my eyes burned. I closed my eyes and hugged my knees. Even with all my newfound powers, I was defenseless. I woke to knocking on my bedroom door. Please, leave me alone.
Someone is here to see you,
Bryson said. Tell whoever it is that I'm not well. I pulled the covers tighter around me. It sounded like a minor scuffle on the other side of the door. The doorknob jiggled, and metal scraped metal. Was that pretentious son of a bitch picking my lock? My anger flared, only to be lost to despair. I couldn't bring myself to care. The door opened. Tessa, honey, are you all right? Haley lifted the comforter from my head. How did you get in? Resourcefulness. She held up a screwdriver. Don't change the subject. What's going on? I'm fine. I'm exhausted. Need to sleep. I hugged my pillow tighter. Holy smokes, what happened to your face? Haley crawled in beside me and pulled the covers over our heads. I got punched by a ticked-off ghost. She pulled the pillow away from my face and smiled. What's going on? I think I hit stage 4 of the grieving process. Skipped over the first 2, dabbled in the anger stage, and landed squarely in depression. I wiped my nose, and my eyes watered from the quick jolt of pain. Oh, honey. Haley scooted closer and carefully drew me into an embrace. I got your message and tried to call you back. I got worried. You never turn your phone off. I'm sorry. Do you want to talk? Nothing much to say. Life sucks. I know. But it will get easier. Give yourself a break. You've been through a lot in the last few days. I feel alone. I keep screwing up, and I need Charlie. He would know what to do. My voice cracked, and my chest hurt so much that I had a difficult time catching my breath. It may seem that way, but you have May and Dottie and me. Plus, that hunky guy out there is worried about you. Haley went from counselor to nosy friend mode in the blink of an eye. I frowned. He is an ass. Haley grinned. A step up from a douche to an ass. Why do you think you're screwing up? I debated how much of the disaster I could safely share with Haley. I almost slept with the detective. Not the guy in your living room? I shook my head. No, not him. Bryson turned me down. The thing is, I didn't care about the sex. I just wanted to forget everything else. It was awful. The almost sex was awful, or you felt awful? Both, I guess. You used the detective to help you deal with your loss. There are better ways to cope, but I don't think that's screwing up. You're being too hard on yourself. You don't understand. He's a good guy, too good. But he's a cop and was asking questions I didn't want to answer, so we ended up half naked in bed. Then, it seemed like Dottie and May knew, but they didn't. I was paranoid, I guess, because we almost did it in Charlie's office. Then Bryson was so angry. He gets on my nerves, but he doesn't deserve the way I've been treating him. He's trying to help, and I hate it. I think I might care about him, maybe. I needed to blow my nose, but knew how much it would hurt. Aaron's partner is a jerk, and he hates me. He's undermining my relationship with Aaron, which is a good thing. It would never work with us, but I care about him too. Now I don't know what the hell to do, because Bryson and Aaron are at each other's throats, and it's my fault because Samuel saw me and Bryson holding hands at the diner. Haley did her best to keep her expression neutral and pretend to understand. I knew I'd overwhelmed her with too much information too quickly. Was it a date? Haley asked. No, it wasn't a date, I sighed. My intuition is off the charts lately. Bryson took me to lunch to introduce me to another seer. That mom who was killed? I saw her and the kids in a vision. I'm helping the police find the killer. Helping Aaron. Whoa, hun. Haley held up her hand and tried to sort through the layers of verbal vomit. Okay, let me see if I got it all. You have feelings for two guys, and they're aware of each other. You believe you had a vision of the murdered woman and are working with the police. Like a psychic? Yes. Haley laughed. You've always wanted to be a criminal psychologist. Yeah, but this is different. You know how I feel about the metaphysical mumbo-jumbo, but it could lead to something else, which is a good thing, right? I guess. As for these guys, you need to take time to grieve before you make any promises to anyone. If they care for you, they'll understand that you need friends right now, not fuck buddies. Haley! I giggled, despite my foul mood. Haley laughed along with me, and the world didn't seem like such a scary place. Ready to get up? Haley grabbed the corner of the comforter. I nodded, and Haley threw the covers back. Chapter 33. Thank you. I sat up and took in my surroundings. It was after 6. I'd slept most of the day. I'll mail you my bill. Haley stood and waited for me to follow her into the living room. Bryson and Haley's husband, Scott, sat on the couch watching a high-speed chase movie. Haley grinned at them. Ready, Scott?
Yeah.
He winced when he noticed my face, then stood and gave me a tight hug.
Call if you need anything.
Thanks for letting me borrow your wife.
No problem. I'm sure you'll have plenty of opportunities to talk her off the ledge before the baby's born.
Scott hugged me again and turned to Bryson.
Nice meeting you, man.
Haley took Scott's hand. I wanted to crawl back in bed. I felt out of place in my own living room. Scott and Bryson acted like they were old friends. Haley and her hubby were always sweet together. The small gesture of holding hands reminded me how much I wanted a real relationship. Tessa, take another week. Dad will understand. Plus, we can't have you seeing clients when you look like you lost the featherweight championship. Haley hugged me one more time, and the happy couple left. I stared at the front door. My bedroom called to me. Whatever ground I'd gained with Haley quickly retreated now that I was alone with Bryson. Bryson asked,
Did you mean what you said?
When?
We could hear most of the conversation. That's why we turned on the television.
You eavesdropped on a private conversation? Bryson's shoulders slumped.
Forget it.
Yes, I meant it. I lowered my head. Bryson stared with a skeptical expression. The silence between us stretched out until I couldn't take another second. As a counselor, I prided myself on my ability to wait out a patient. I was comfortable with silence. Unless, of course, it was my personal life under discussion. I need time. I had a life before this happened to me, and I want it back. At least some of it, anyway.
You made that perfectly clear.
He sounded tired. That's not what I meant. I walked to the couch and plopped down, drawing my feet under my body. As much as you drive me crazy, I feel comfortable with you. He sat on the other side of the couch facing me. I'm not used to leaning on people, especially not someone I've only just met. I know I need to lean on you, though, and it's making me nuts. I hoped he understood what I was trying to say.
I can see that.
He held his emotions so close to the vest I couldn't read him. I'll stop being such a jerk. You don't deserve it. I chewed the skin on the edge of my fingernail and frowned. A nervous habit I thought I'd kicked a few years ago. Wrong again.
I'd appreciate that.
He leaned forward and took my hand. I blushed. Did he take my hand to keep me from chewing my cuticle, or because he wanted to hold it? Brassen stood and drew me to my feet.
Take off the robe.
What? No, I don't think we should fool around, Brassen.
I wasn't propositioning you.
He shook his head.
You need to shift.
Oh. The heat in my gut, the small coil of my power flared to life. I closed my eyes and focused. The room grew brighter, and my vision changed from human to something more precise. I stepped from the robe and opened my wings. I stretched my neck and rolled my head. Brassen's smile lit up his eyes. In that moment, I felt strong and beautiful. The instinct to fly rose up, but closed windows and a ceiling fan presented new dangers.
Stay focused. Shift back,
Brassen urged. I struggled to push aside the needs of my spirit animal. I dipped my head and closed my eyes. When I opened them again, I was human. The horror movies had it all wrong. My bones didn't morph, and I didn't produce supernatural goo when I changed forms. It felt like putting on or taking off a well-worn coat.
Your face is fixed.
Brassen didn't drop his eyes to my bare chest. He maintained eye contact, unaffected by my nudity. My headache is gone. I bent down and picked up my robe. Smoke rose from the sleeves and hem. And this is ruined. Chapter 34. Bryson looked over the menu as if studying for a final exam. He flipped back and forth between 3 pages in complete concentration. He'd taken nearly 5 minutes to decide on a beer, partly because the drink menu was twice as long as the dinner menu. The Willow Tree Cafe had the best German food for miles, and a fun, laid-back atmosphere. Can I make a suggestion? I grinned and pointed at a sampler platter. The menu says it's for 2, but it's enough food for 4 people. Bryson read over the description and flipped the page one last time.
That works, as long as we can get an order of sauerbraten to go.
I sat back in my chair. Sure, we'll be eating leftovers for a week, but I'm game.
Psst, I'm starving. I could eat it all right now.
He took a gulp from his mug.
I love German food. It was one of the perks of being stationed in Germany.
You were in the military?
20 years in the army, 4 stationed in Heidelberg.
He smiled at the waitress as she set a bread basket on the table. I chuckled when he placed the order in German. The waitress seemed surprised but fell into a conversation. The only work I caught was Heidelberg, which he'd just told me was a place. What do you do now? I sipped my gummy bear martini.
This and that. I haven't had a day job in years.
He finished his beer and motioned for the waitress to bring another.
What made you go into psychology?
I missed his question, surprised by his casual attitude toward being unemployed. No wonder he hadn't complained about sleeping on the couch or in May's bed. Maybe he lived at the tribal house.
Tessa?
Hmm?
Why did you choose psychology?
Bryson nodded to the barmaid as she set his mug on the table. The woman tried to make eye contact with Bryson, hanging around the table. Heck, she even glanced over her shoulder to see if he was watching her departure. I like figuring out what makes people do the things they do. I smiled. For instance, the barmaid was trying to flirt with you. You, on the other hand, were clueless. Bryson laughed and leaned across the table.
Not clueless. She's 5'3", greenish blue eyes, has a tattoo on the side of her neck, and her earrings are in the shape of crescent moons. I didn't encourage her, because I'm here with you."
My mouth fell open. Wow, I'm embarrassed. Bryson shook his head, his smile brightening his eyes.
"No, you aren't. You blush when you're embarrassed."
"I don't know if I'm flattered or freaked out that you notice so much about me." He grinned and leaned back in his chair.
"It's part of the job."
Was I just part of the job? I sipped my martini, considering his words. The elders had ordered him to guard me. From previous conversations, I knew they'd spoken to him about the two of us collaborating to ensure the survival of our race. That couldn't be all there was to it, but I didn't know how much he cared about me as a person versus me as a Nunahi mate. "Excuse me, I need to visit the ladies' room." Bryson stood when I did.
"Something wrong?"
"Not at all." I smiled and walked away. When I returned, the waitress brought the food to the table. Perfect timing because I didn't want to discuss his job duties. Bryson surveyed the enormous platter of food. He reminded me of a kid at Christmas, trying to decide which present to open first.
"Ladies first."
He motioned to my plate. I served myself a little of each of the items. Bryson filled his plate and put a different flavor of mustard on each of the sausages. He made an art out of eating, each bite a mixture of meat, mustard, and sauerkraut. He said,
"Man, you weren't kidding. This is really good."
Something about watching a guy stuff his face made me happy. Maybe it was because I was raised in a house where dinner was an event, and nothing ever came out of a box unless it was pizza. "Save room for dessert," I told him.
"No worries there. I have a separate stomach for sweets."
He winked and took another bite. I mulled over his words. "Do birds have two stomachs?" Bryson laughed, deep and loud. His smile softened the hard lines of his face as he wiped his mouth with his napkin.
"I didn't mean it literally."
"Have you ever been married?" My curiosity got the better of me. I hadn't seen this side of Bryson, though, in all fairness, I hadn't given him the chance.
"Once, but it was a while ago. She was a shifter, a fox."
Bryson must have seen the question on my face, because he quickly added,
"Literally, her spirit animal was a fox."
I grinned. "Thanks for clarifying. What happened?"
"She died."
His smile dimmed, and he turned his attention back to his plate.
"She was coming home from work. The roads were icy. She died at the scene."
"I'm sorry." I reached for his hand. "Do you have children?"
"No kids, just dogs. They're easier, and no one complains if you leave them in a crate while you're working."
I love animals. I'd love to have a pet, but I'm allergic to cats and I'm not home enough to take care of a dog.
"What do you like to do for fun?"
He crossed his fork and knife over his empty plate and sat back in his chair. "I love the beach, camping, hiking, movies, and concerts. Anything, I guess. How about you?" He tilted his head.
"With your skin, I imagine you burn easily."
"Burn, freckle, peel, but I lather on the sunscreen and suck it up." I debated opening the button on my jeans to make more room.
"I like to be outdoors, but I have been known to attend the ballet and theater now and then."
I was in theater all through school, at least when I was with May. I wanted to go to Florida State and major in fine arts, but I bombed the audition.
"There's this great community theater about an hour from here. I'll get us tickets if you want to go next weekend."
That sounds like fun. We smiled at each other across the table. The polka band started, and our conversation slowed. Music filled the restaurant, and several patrons danced. Bryson scooted his chair close to mine and leaned close.
I'd ask you to dance, but I'm no good at the polka.
I can do the chicken dance, but that's about it. I watched the band, distracted by how close he sat. I hadn't noticed how good he smelled. I hadn't noticed a lot of things about Bryson. 2 rounds of drinks and an apple strudel later, we wandered onto the street. Bryson took my hand and led me toward the parking lot, his to-go order dangling in one hand.
Want to walk a bit?
Sure. The lake is a block that way. I pointed north, trying to think of something to say. I had so many questions, yet nothing sounded right. I stumbled on the uneven sidewalk, and Bryson put his arm around my shoulder.
You're a little tipsy.
No, I'm a little drunk. I laughed, enjoying the comfort and safety of being tucked close beside him. We walked along the lakeshore. Moonlight was dancing across the water. Bryson stopped walking and pulled me close. I turned my face up toward his. He brushed his hand across my cheek, cupped the back of my head.
May I kiss you?
Yes. My stomach did a somersault and landed on my feet. Bryson slid his arm around me. The plastic bag made crinkling sounds as it brushed against my back. It distracted me until he pressed his lips to mine. He teased my lips with his tongue, urging me to open my mouth. Bryson kissed me both gently and fiercely. He held my head firmly in place as he explored my mouth. When he pulled back, he ran his thumb over my lower lip, kissed the top of my head, and held me close.
We should get you home,
he whispered into my hair. Uh-huh. My head spun, but not from the alcohol. I couldn't help but wonder if he had plans for me at home. The last thing I needed was to do something we might regret. Just because he said we should go home didn't mean we would fall into bed, did it? Did I want to?
Tessa, relax. I can hear the gears turning in your head.
He turned toward me and smiled.
Stop thinking so much and be here with me right now.
I laughed. You and Haley are going to get along great. Bryson drove back to my apartment and parked. I waited for him to check the surroundings without complaint. For the first time, AC, after Charlie, as I began to think of it, I felt normal. Thanks for dinner. I didn't expect you to pay. I smiled when he took my hand.
I don't feel right letting a woman pay. I know it's old-fashioned, but so am I.
He put my key in the door and motioned for me to stay in the hall while he went inside.
All clear.
Still, it was my suggestion, and it was expensive. He was unemployed. Besides, I owed him a huge debt for everything he'd done for me. I mean, I don't know if the elders are paying you for being my bodyguard, but you're unemployed. I feel bad.
Unemployed?
He looked as if I'd lost my mind.
Why do you think I'm unemployed?
You said you hadn't had a day job in years. I assumed.
I'm a sculptor. I do well for myself, well enough that I don't have to punch a clock.
He grinned.
Now you're embarrassed.
My cheeks burned. I wanted to crawl under a rock and hide. I'm usually better at figuring people out. You have me all out of sorts.
Don't worry about it.
He plopped down on the sofa.
Want to watch a movie?
Sure. Just let me change first. I went into my bedroom and pulled on a pair of boxers and an old concert t-shirt. When I returned to the living room, Bryson was laughing at the screen.
I love The Princess Bride,
he said. I sat beside him. He pulled me close. The next morning, I woke in my bed and smiled, listening to Bryson snore from the other room. Chapter 35.
Tessa, it's Aaron. We have a lead on the missing kids. Can you come to the station around 10?
Bryson watched me out of the corner of his eye. It wouldn't have surprised me if he'd overheard Aaron. The volume of his voice made my hangover worse. I turned my back to Bryson. Yeah, sure. Be there in an hour.
Great. See you then.
The call disconnected, and I set the cell phone on the counter. There's a lead in the case. Aaron needs me at the station.
I'll come with you.
Bryson flipped the eggs he was cooking and put 2 pieces of bread in the toaster. The only salvageable food in my fridge. Eggs and bread. I was hoping you'd say that. I sipped my coffee. I need to shower.
Eat first. It'll help your hangover.
Bryson dumped half the eggs onto a plate along with toast.
Or you could shift and cure it in a few minutes.
That would be cheating. Hangovers are God's way of making us not drink so much next time.
If you say so.
I ate standing at the kitchen counter. My mind raced, distracted only by the pounding in my head. Bryson finished his food and moved to the sink. When we'd first met, I thought he was a Neanderthal, but the more I learned about him, the more he intrigued me.
What's on your mind?
He put his plate in the dishwasher. Thinking about the case. I set my plate beside his, my shoulder brushing his arm as I turned.
As soon as we're done at the station, we need to go speak to the elders. We need to find the conjurer before he finds another puppet.
How are we going to find him? We don't even know his name.
You've seen his face. Besides, how many conjurers out there are powerful enough to pull off half the crap he has? I'm sure it's a short list. Once we know who he is, we can track him down and finish this.
Bryson sounded sure of himself. Then we can get back to our normal lives. My stomach sank. I didn't know what normal looked like anymore.
Somehow, I doubt life will ever be the same, Tessa. Like it or not, we're bound together.
I held his gaze, unsure if he liked the idea of being stuck with me. Had I read him wrong? We'd had a great night between the conversation and that kiss. Was he making the best of a bad situation? I repeated, I need to shower. I showered and dressed. Despite my hangover and the jumble of emotions, I wanted to get to work. I couldn't do much about my life, but I could help solve this murder case and find the missing kids. I came out into the living room and said, "The bathroom is yours." I sat at my desk and turned on the computer. Bryson headed for the shower. Haley was right. I shouldn't get involved with anyone until things settled. I needed to focus on finding 2 murderers before I worried about getting a date. It took some digging to find Buck's email address, and I rewrote the email 3 times before I had it right. I didn't want to tell him too much, but I needed to grab his attention. Bryson emerged, wearing only a towel.
We need to talk.
I hit send on the email and stood. I sent Buck an email catching him up on the situation. I requested a council meeting this afternoon.
I wish you would have let me read it before you'd sent it.
I said, I didn't mention anything personal. I told him about Marvin and the conjurer being a skinwalker and that you've stopped 2 attacks on my life. I went to the kitchen for more coffee. I'm not stupid.
Tessa.
Bryson paused, likely counting to 10 to calm his temper.
Buck has a secretary who reads his emails. Not to mention, whoever is doing this is vying for power within the tribe, which leads me to believe it's someone who already has a position.
I stared at him.
my eyes burning. I wouldn't let him see me cry. I wouldn't. I'm sorry.
What's done is done.
What did you want to talk about? I turned and filled my cup.
Last night.
I hung my head. There's nothing to say. We had dinner, got a little drunk, and kissed. It was stupid, but it won't happen again. He moved behind me and took my mug from my hand.
Is that how you feel?
I turned to face him. I don't know how I feel.
Tessa, I enjoyed last night and hope we have many more together, but you've been through a lot. I don't want to push you.
Maybe I want you to push me. He slid his arms around my waist and kissed me. My hands played over his bare back as I returned the kiss. Any rational thought fled when he lifted me to the counter. He pulled back and took my face in his hands.
I should get dressed.
I cupped the back of his neck and pulled his head down to mine, brushing my lips across his. We have time. Aaron said to meet him at 10.
Tessa.
He stepped between my knees and kissed a line from my ear to my collarbone. I draped my arms over his shoulders as his fingers pressed into my hips, pulling me forward. I wanted to pull his towel loose, to explore his muscular chest with my tongue, to wrap myself around him like a vine. Bryson lifted his head and held me to his chest. His heart raced against my ear.
We can't do this.
I didn't know what to think. On the surface, his hesitation felt like rejection, but I knew better. He was stopping to keep me from getting hurt, or perhaps to keep himself from getting hurt. Then again, he had a job to do. He was supposed to keep me safe. Did he have an issue mixing business with pleasure? Why? He smiled and brushed my hair back from my face.
Because you need time to heal your heart before you can give it to me.
It wasn't my heart I was offering. He bowed his head and nodded. The hurt look in his eyes gave me pause. Bad joke. I'm sorry.
I haven't dated in years. I don't know the rules anymore.
He took a step back and leaned against the opposite counter. How long has it been?
Since my wife.
Oh.
I've been busy.
He folded his arms across his chest. I never thought I would see Bryson actually pout. I grinned and hopped off the counter. You should get dressed, I told him. He grabbed my arm and spun me against his body.
Don't sleep with Aaron until we part ways.
I wanted to tell him I would sleep with whomever I chose, but the words wouldn't come out. He kissed me again, and I couldn't imagine kissing anyone else. Okay. Chapter 36. Bryson and I drove to the police station in silence, hand in hand. He focused on the road, but I stole a few glances in his direction. I'd never met someone who could frustrate me one minute and melt me the next. Aaron met us in the lobby and ushered us into a small conference room. A palpable tension simmered in the room. Aaron sat and pounded on the keyboard while Bryson hung close to me. Samuels leaned against the wall, watching us with a disapproving look. The guy seemed to suck all the oxygen from the air. Samuels pressed his lips into a tight line.
Miss Lamar, I see your nose is healed.
Thanks for noticing. I took a chair and waited for someone to tell me about this lead. I had enough to deal with without taking Samuel's bait. Aaron glanced between Bryson and me, then back to the laptop. After a moment, he turned the screen toward me.
Do you know this guy?
The satisfied smile on his face told me he fully expected me to recognize the face on the computer. I studied the face and shook my head. No? Aaron winked at Samuels and clicked to the next picture. I knew the face. The blond man staring back at me was the same man I'd watched stab the woman 20-some-odd times. That's him.
Miss Lamar, can you be more specific?
Samuels leaned in as Aaron pulled up another photo. This one showed the killer and the murder victim arm in arm and smiling. Yes, that's the man I saw stabbing Mrs. Rivera in her kitchen, and that is Mrs. Rivera. I sat back to put more distance between myself and the image.
Great.
Aaron stood, grinning from ear to ear. Even Detective Samuels seemed pleased as he turned for the door. Who is he? I wasn't going to let them walk out without an explanation.
We don't know yet. Once we got her email address from her mother, we were able to get a court order to access her email history. Someone deleted everything from this guy, but nothing ever truly vanishes from cyberspace. We have his email address now. It shouldn't take long to figure out who he is. With any luck, we'll find something incriminating enough to get a search warrant.
Aaron clamped a hand on my shoulder.
Thanks, Tessa. I'll call you soon.
I stayed in the cold metal chair after the detectives left the room. I hung my head and took some deep breaths. Bryson ran his hand over my shoulders. I whispered, "Give me a minute, please."
Babe, just let it out.
He kissed the top of my head. I made a sound somewhere between a sob and a cough and wiped my eyes. We need to get to Geneva and talk to Buck. Chapter 37. Bryson and I sat in a different conference room. Unlike the sterile metal table and chairs at the police station, this room contained heavy wooden furniture covered in hand-woven blankets. Buck Oldham sat across from us, his hands gripping the chair.
You should have brought Dr. Hicks here. I do not understand why you allowed him to go free. Your purpose was to keep Tessa safe, and he's obviously a threat. Even if you broke the bond, he is susceptible to being possessed again, and he is a criminal.
Buck's voice boomed through the room.
You're right. I should have brought him here. I allowed my concern for Tessa to get in the way of my better judgment.
Bryson sounded so contrite that I found myself fidgeting. No, that's not what happened. I wanted to pull the words back in as soon as they came out. The warning look Bryson gave me would have made a grizzly bear cower.
Go on, Tessa.
Buck cast Bryson a look of his own. The conjurer appeared in my mirror. I screamed and started the banishment spell. Bryson heard me and came to help. If he hadn't come when he did, I don't know what would have happened. Dr. Hicks got away when Bryson came to help me. I stammered as I lied through my teeth. It wasn't a total lie. The conjurer had appeared in the mirror, and Bryson had helped me. Only not when Dr. Hicks was there.
How did he help you?
Buck leaned forward, giving me his undivided attention. When Bryson tried to speak, Buck raised his hand. I would have given anything for a timeout. I needed to talk to Bryson alone. I wasn't strong enough to banish him. Bryson said the chant with me, and we were able to force him to go.
Is that all? He spoke the words with you.
Buck's voice had a curious lilt, as if he knew the answer before I spoke. No. He touched my skin, and the mirror shattered. Bryson sucked in air and hung his head. Buck glanced between us and smiled.
Tlutnowa, why do you look so defeated? You have found your flaming arrow. So it appears.
Bryson glanced between Buck and me.
Do you know who this man is? I have my suspicions, but can't be certain. You will need to catch him through one he possesses. It is the only way to prove what you say is true. We will need evidence to convince the council of his crimes.
Buck stood.
Once this is concluded, you will take May your gifts. If she accepts them, she and I will plan the bride and groom feasts.
Buck left the room. I couldn't wrap my brain around the conversation. He hadn't given us the information we needed, a name, an address, anything. The talk of gifts and wedding feasts, well, that was just preposterous. Even in the old days, women had the right to refuse a proposal.
I thought we agreed I would do the talking.
Bryson didn't sound happy. What? I was trying to get you out of trouble. I stood, determined to find Buck and set him straight.
I wasn't in trouble, Tessa. Not until you told him we were able to combine our energies. Do you know what you just did?
Bryson advanced on me, blocking my path to the door. I set my hands on my hips and met his gaze. If he thinks I'm going to marry you, then he is delusional.
Tessa, it's not that simple,
Bryson said.
Do you know Cherokee lore?
Some, I guess. My temper faded from scorching hot to a cold ball of worry.
Tlutnowa were a mated pair of birds. Some believe one is the bow, the other an arrow. A flaming arrow. Together, they're deadly.
We are half human and half Nunehi. How can we also be these Tlutnowa things? This new reality made my head hurt. The rational part of me didn't believe in old folk tales and superstitions, but after I'd changed into a flaming bird, the rational side lost the battle.
You're missing the point. We aren't Tlutnowa in the flesh, but we are something unique in the spirit. Since we are both part spirit creatures, that means something.
Bryson took my shoulders in his hands, as if he could force understanding into me by will alone. I don't buy any... Bryson cut me short with a fierce kiss. It stunned me senseless, and by the time my brain started working again, I found myself pressed against his body. Bryson pulled his face from mine and stared at the ceiling. I couldn't tell if his pain or exasperation caused his expression.
This will all sort itself out in time. Right now, we need to find the bastard who's trying to kill you.
I followed Bryson to the car. For once, he didn't insist on scouring the area for bad guys. Somehow, it didn't make me feel better. My knees shook, and I didn't trust myself behind the wheel. I tossed Bryson the keys and sank into the passenger seat. So, what's the plan? I chewed the skin on the side of my thumb until I tasted blood.
We find Marvin, and somehow reconnect the bond. Once the conjurer is back inside him, we do a binding spell to keep him there. Then, a tracking spell to find him.
Bryson didn't take his eyes off the road. His knuckles were white on the wheel. Great! So, where do we find Marvin? I didn't think it would be easy to find him. Never mind doing 3 spells in succession. How in the hell were we supposed to hold Marvin still long enough to reconnect the bond?
You have his cell phone number. We can start by calling him. Then we get Aaron to run his plates and get an address.
I doubt he's going to answer my call. How are we going to get Aaron to run his plates? He'll ask a million questions. Besides, why would Marvin go back to his house if the conjurer is searching for him? Let's say we find him. How do we hold him down long enough to do the spells? What if the conjurer has moved on and has a new body? What if he figures out what we're trying to do? This is never going to work. I chewed my thumb again.
Finished?
Bryson chuckled. This isn't funny. It's a crap sandwich. Just when I think I'm done, I have to take another giant bite.
We will find Marvin. Don't worry.
Bryson reached over and took my thumb from my mouth.
Quit chewing your fingers. It'll be all right.
I shifted in my seat. Where are we going now?
To get Charlie's journal. We'll need it when we find Marvin.
Oh, no. It's at May's. What if Buck has already called there? We're going to be walking into a crap storm. I brought my index finger to my mouth.
It will go great with your crab sandwich.
Bryson laughed and hit the gas. Chapter 38. Oh, no. 2 extra cars sat in the driveway. No.
What's wrong?
Bryson hit the lock button to keep me from climbing out of the car before it stopped. That's my mother's, Darlene's car. And Aaron is here. I grabbed his arm. Let's go. I don't want to do this now.
Tessa, we have to get the journal. It will be fine.
Bryson took my hand. Yeah, well, you don't know Darlene. I sat back in the seat, pouting. Bryson got out of the car and scanned the far side of the railroad tracks and the yard. I sprang from the car the moment he opened the door and burst through the front door with Bryson following. My, look what the cat dragged in. Darlene smiled from the kitchen table where she sat with Aaron and May. We were just talking about you. Bryson set his hand on my shoulder. He kept me upright and prevented me from launching myself at Darlene.
I didn't realize you weren't staying here anymore. I stopped by to thank you for your help,
Aaron said, clearing his throat. I could only imagine what Darlene had said to him. Yes, Aaron was telling me how you two met. Darlene slurred his name until it sounded almost sing-song. Maybe you should call before you stop in? I didn't mean to sound gruff, but he should have called.
I tried several times.
Aaron stood, and Darlene grabbed his hand, tugging him back down. Tessa Marie, that is no way to speak to a fine, upstanding member of the law. Darlene feigned horror. Bryson stepped forward and extended his hand.
I'm Bryson. You must be Darlene.
I moved past him into my bedroom. Before I closed the door, I caught a glimpse of Darlene. She stared at Bryson like he was the tastiest cupcake in the case. Wasting no time, I ignored the voices in the other room and stuffed the cedar box into my pillowcase. May would ask too many questions if she saw me taking the box out of the house. I went back out. Aaron, I said, it was nice to see you, but Bryson and I have to go. Maybe we can meet up later? I hugged the pillow, pressing the edges of the box into my chest.
Sure, yeah. I have to get back to work anyway.
He stood again, shooting Bryson and me a quizzical look. I'll walk you out. I smiled and blew May a kiss. As I turned for the door, May stood.
Tessa Marie, why are you off in such a hurry?
Her tone made me feel 8 years old. Bryson needs to be in Geneva in 45 minutes. He's going to be late if we don't hot-foot it out of here. May pursed her lips and narrowed her eyes, knowing full well I'd lied.
All right, then, you better scoot. I expect you two for dinner at 6. No arguments.
Oh, I just love a family dinner, Darlene chimed in with her saccharine sweet smile.
This isn't a family dinner. I need to speak with Miss Tessa Marie.
May's chin rose and she nodded, telling me I had darned well better be there at 6. Darlene grinned, making no move to leave. I better go. I don't know what's going on here, but someone is in trouble. No doubt she planned to stay and fish for information. Yes, ma'am. I frowned at Bryson and stepped outside. I needed some fresh air after dealing with Darlene. Aaron on one side, Bryson on the other. I walked to my car. Sorry about that.
Man, you really can't lie.
Aaron chuckled.
I thought she was going to send you to the corner.
I bit back my words to keep from taking my frustration out on him. This was, after all, his fault. I'll talk to you later. Aaron stepped in the way before I could shut the door.
Hey, sorry. I was only teasing.
He smiled.
I have news on the case. Do you have time to hear it?
Bryson stuck the key into the ignition, but didn't turn it over. I shrugged and fastened my seatbelt. Sure. Aaron gave me the same curious look he had inside.
You're in a hurry. I'll catch you up over drinks tonight. That is, if your bodyguard will let me have you all to myself.
I nodded, thinking this situation could not possibly be more awkward. Sounds like a plan. Call me later. Aaron leaned in to kiss me, but I turned my head in the nick of time. His lips landed on my cheek. The situation had become even more awkward. Bryson started the car before I could think of anything to say. Aaron narrowed his eyes at the other man.
Bye, Tessa.
Bye, Aaron. I smiled as he closed my door and slapped the top of the car. Well, that sucked. I pulled the box from the pillowcase. Bryson remained stoic, his eyes on the road.
Are you going out with him tonight?
No, I'll tell him I have a headache when he calls. I turned my face toward the window.
You better learn to lie between now and then.
He downshifted as he pulled onto the highway. Are you angry with me?
Nope. Contrary to popular belief, we are not engaged. Hell, we aren't even dating.
I opened the box and stared at the picture of Charlie and me. What I wouldn't give to be 4 again, when he was the only man in my life. We may need Aaron to find Marvin. I don't want to burn that bridge yet.
True.
Bryson nodded in my direction.
I don't have anything against him. He's a good guy. But the longer you string him along, the harder it is going to be to walk away.
What if I don't walk away? What if we remain friends?
I know you have feelings for him. Can you do that?
I have male friends I don't sleep with.
I'm not talking about sex. Can you keep him at arm's length and maintain a friendship?
Could I? I didn't know.
You know he wants more than that from you.
I know. I turned back to the window. Chapter 39. The entire afternoon turned into an exercise in patience. Marvin Hicks had disconnected his cell phone. He hadn't returned to work, and the university hadn't heard from him. Bryson followed up on a few leads and hit a wall every time. To make matters worse, he grew quiet and withdrawn, while I wanted to scream. I think I should call Aaron and ask him to run the plates. Do you think he can check Marvin's credit card activity? He couldn't have vanished off the face of the earth. I paced while Bryson banged on the keyboard.
Sure.
He leaned closer to the screen. I threw my hands up and marched to the bedroom. I took a moment to calm down before dialing Aaron's number.
Hey, Tessa. I was about to call you.
Aaron sounded as chipper as ever. I thought I would call and firm up plans, I said. How many more lies would I tell before this was over?
I should get off work by 8. Will that give you enough time to finish dinner with May?
He laughed. He'd better not be laughing at me. I sweetened my voice. You get more flies with honey than with vinegar, and I'd needed a few flies. I hope so. If not, you might have to call for backup to get me out of there. Let's say 8 at Fitzpatrick's in Winter Park. Do you know the place?
Irish bar near Rollins, right?
Yes, sir, that's the place. I swallowed back bile. Tonight, I would give him the "it's not you, it's me" conversation.
Okay. See you then.
Aaron, I have a huge favor to ask. Do you remember Dr. Hicks?
Yeah, he was there when you got shot.
He's missing. He hasn't shown up for work and no one can reach him. Is there any way you can check up on his credit cards or license plate? Whatever it is you guys do to find people?
Sure, but someone should file a missing persons report.
I know, but we haven't reached any of his family. Dottie had only one number for him and it's disconnected. It would ease our minds if we knew he was all right. With everything going on, I laid it on thick, praying it would work.
I'm on it. Marvin Hicks from UF. Anything else?
That's it. Thank you, Aaron. I sighed in relief. Aaron would find him. See you at 8. Bryson watched me as I came out of the bedroom. He turned and wrote something on a sheet of paper. The tension between us was driving me nuts. I thought we'd drawn a truce after our recent night out, but the tension returned. He's going to try to find Dr. Hicks. I'm meeting him at 8. I plan to tell him I need some time to deal with my loss before I jump into a relationship. I sat on the couch as Bryson pulled his boots on.
Is that what you want?
He met my eyes. It's what I need to do. Haley was right when she told me to take my time.
Fair enough.
He picked up my keys and Charlie's book.
We need to go or we'll be late for dinner.
Why are you so angry with me? I'd had enough tiptoeing around. If he wouldn't talk on his own, then I'd pick a fight to get him talking.
I'm not upset with you.
Bryson folded his arms across his chest, watching me as if I were a puzzle to solve. Fair enough? I stood, grabbing my purse off the table.
I'm nervous, okay?
He said. About what? We will find Marvin. If he doubted our ability to find Marvin, we were in serious trouble.
Yes, we will.
Then why are you nervous?
May. She was pretty quiet today. I don't know her well, but that can't be good.
I giggled, covering my mouth in an effort to hold in my laughter. The mental image of May beating Bryson with a rolled-up newspaper played through my head. Bryson closed the distance between us in 2 strides, drew me into his arms, and half pulled me to the door.
Laugh it up, but I'm serious.
The tension in Bryson's shoulders increased with each mile. I couldn't help but grin as he worked himself up over May. I didn't look forward to her lecture, but I'd faced this sort of thing before. We'd lived through it. If I were a bigger person, I would have tried to calm him down. Truth be told, I enjoyed watching him squirm. Bryson swept the yard while I waited in the car. I offered my sweetest smile when he opened my door. Bryson, relax. She can smell fear like skunk on a dog. He gave me a dirty look. Walking to the front door reminded me of walking in front of a firing squad. although this firing squad promised to be entertaining and involved food.
"You two get over here and set the table,"
May said, elbow deep in potato salad. I winked at Bryson and pulled down 4 plates. He set out the forks and knives. By the time we'd set the table, May had the food on platters and bowls. "It smells good, Graham," I told her.
"Of course it does. Now put the chicken on the table, and one of you needs to explain why I was asked to plan a bride feast."
May dried her hands and looked between us. "Wait, don't tell yet. I want to hear this too." Dottie came in with a basket full of tomatoes from the garden. Unlike May, Dottie seemed tickled by the newest turn of events. I decided to let Bryson explain, since every time I opened my mouth, I put my foot in it. He shook his head and took his seat at the table. Of all the times for him to be a coward. "It's all a big misunderstanding," I said.
"Tessa Marie, I'm an old woman. I don't have all night to wait for you to tell me what happened. I know it's a misunderstanding."
May sat and passed the food. I relayed the high points of our conversation with Buck. My life had more drama than one of their soap operas.
"Bryson, will you kindly tell me how old you are?"
May never took her eyes off me.
"Ma'am?"
Bryson set the bowl of carrots on the table.
"You heard me."
May slid her eyes in his direction. Bryson glanced between Dottie and May.
"A little over 100 this August."
My jaw hit the table. He'd told me he was in his 60s when Dottie and Charlie were married, but I hadn't done the math. May made a disapproving noise. Dottie reached over and took May's hand in hers. I sat back in my chair as my world tilted. Dottie asked, "How do you feel about this, Bryson?"
"It isn't my decision, but I do plan to bring May gifts once we find the one who caused all of this trouble,"
he said with a steady voice.
"Tessa, do you understand what he means?"
May stared at Bryson. "No." I slumped in my chair, trying to make myself as small as I felt. Bryson took my hand.
"It is customary for the man to bring gifts to the woman's grandmother. May must accept my gifts before I can ask you to be my wife. Of course, you must also accept the proposal."
I yanked my hand away and shook my head.
"Tessa, you have a lot to deal with right now. I'll wait until you're ready,"
Bryson said. The defeat in his voice stole my breath. We barely know each other. I can't believe we're even having this conversation. I don't know when I'll be ready or if I'll ever be ready. Bryson smiled.
"I'm a patient man."
May laughed and said,
"Good. You'll need to be if you're going to marry my great-granddaughter. Now that we have that settled, eat before it gets cold."
Chapter 40. I sat at the bar, admiring the brass railing and shiny bar top. After some negotiation, I convinced Bryson to let me speak to Aaron alone. Despite the risks, if I had any hope of maintaining a friendship with Aaron, I needed to speak to him without a babysitter. I used to come here for happy hour once or twice a week. It felt like it had been years since I'd sat on the worn bar stools and chatted with my favorite bartender. I rehearsed what I would say to Aaron. Preoccupied, I didn't notice Haley sidle up next to me. "Penny for your thoughts?" Haley leaned over, pressing her shoulder into mine. I turned and hugged her. "I thought your rate was $120 an hour? Friends and family discount." Haley glanced at my drink. "What I wouldn't give for a hot Irish right now. I slid the drink out of Haley's reach. Where's Scott? Parking the car. He didn't think I should walk 2 blocks in the rain. Haley frowned, though I knew she loved the attention. Are you meeting someone? That detective I told you about. Oh, the blue-eyed Adonis? Haley snickered.
What blue-eyed Adonis?
Aaron whispered in my ear and slid his arms around my waist. Haley laughed as I blushed. Speak of the devil. I eased from Aaron's grip and took a sip of my drink. Haley, this is Aaron. Aaron, this is Haley, my best friend. Nice to meet you, Aaron. I'm going to grab a table. Tessa, call me later. She pointed and made a telephone with her fingers, mouthing, call me, as she walked away.
She doesn't look pregnant.
Aaron claimed the stool Haley had vacated. She's not showing it. I didn't remember telling him Haley was pregnant. I studied Aaron's face, noting the shadows under his eyes. Are you coming down with something? Aaron shrugged.
I think it's lack of sleep and too much junk food. This case has me working around the clock.
You need to take care of yourself. I sipped my drink. Did you find out anything about Marvin?
Nothing yet, but I have people looking for him. Someone should have really filled out a missing persons report before we invaded his privacy.
I know, but I don't know how to get in touch with his family. Thanks for helping out.
I owed you one. You were right about the computer being missing.
He motioned for the bartender and ordered a Guinness. Did you track down the guy in the pictures?
Not yet. We're waiting on a court order to crack into his email, but I found his Facebook page. He used the same email address we had to create his account.
Aaron took a drink of his beer. He then pushed it aside, looking rather green. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. So when we read Mrs. Rivera's emails, we figured out she was having an affair with this guy.
Aaron grinned. That could explain him flipping out and killing her, but why would he take the kids? While I enjoyed listening to Aaron talk about work, I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable discussing the private life of a murder victim. Sure, I discussed people's private lives every day for work, but this felt different.
There's some discrepancy as to who fathered the children. There's no way to know what's true from reading the emails, but we think we've established a motive. Now, we just have to find him.
Aaron swayed on his stool. I reached out and steadied him. You look awful. Let me drive you home.
After you blocked my kiss, I wasn't sure you were interested.
Aaron's words slurred. We'll talk about that later. Right now, I think you need some sleep. I stood and offered him my arm, surprised when he actually leaned most of his weight on me. Before I caught my balance, Aaron stumbled, pulling us to the floor. Scott ran over and helped pull the passed-out Aaron off me.
Tessa, are you okay?
Help him. I cradled Aaron's head in my lap.
We need an ambulance,
Scott called to the bartender.
Please call 911. He's drunk. Give him a minute, he'll come around.
The bartender laughed. I snapped my head toward the bar. No, he had a sip of beer and passed out. He's a cop, just got off work. Something is wrong. Call an ambulance. The bartender picked up the phone. I put my hand on Aaron's forehead. He's burning up. I swallowed my panic. I had to stay in control for Aaron's sake. Scott handed me a damp towel, and I placed it on Aaron's brow. Help is on the way, Aaron. He opened his eyes and smiled for a second before he drifted off again. Time slowed to a trickle. The paramedics came through the door and scooted me out of their way. I stood between Scott and Haley, watching as they loaded Aaron on the gurney and wheeled him out of the bar. Wait, I'm going with him, I called to one of the paramedics.
Are you family?
He turned and prepped Aaron's arm for an IV. No? He pulled a long needle from the sterile pack.
Sorry, miss. You'll have to meet us at the emergency room. We're taking him to Winter Park. Do you know where that is?
I nodded, and they shut the door. Scott wrapped his arm around my shoulder.
We'll drive you.
No thanks. I learned my lesson the last time I accepted a ride to the hospital. Be careful and don't speed. It will be a while before they allow you to see him. Haley hugged me. I sprinted to my car, left the parking lot, and dialed Bryson. Bryson, it's Tessa. Something is wrong with Aaron. He collapsed. I'm following the ambulance to the hospital now.
Come pick me up. I'll go with you.
Bryson replied. There's no time. I need to get there.
Tessa, they won't let you go back until they have him stabilized. Come pick me up. This is not negotiable.
Meet me in the parking lot. I hung up and tossed my phone into the passenger seat. Bryson's calmness impressed me. I felt like I was one beat away from falling apart. The drive to my apartment went by in a blur. Bryson waited outside when I pulled up. He climbed in, and I pulled out into traffic, narrowly missing a large SUV in the process.
Okay, slow down and tell me exactly what happened.
Bryson pulled his seatbelt on and gripped the dashboard as I turned a corner. He looked sick when he came in. He took one sip of beer, we talked for a few minutes, and then he started to go sideways. I stood to help him, and he passed out. I blew through a red light and checked in the rear view for flashing lights. I turned toward Bryson. The look in his eyes nearly stopped my heart. Is it dark magic?
I don't know. Maybe.
Bryson set his jaw and stared straight ahead. Chapter 41. I awoke, surprised to find myself nestled into the curve of Bryson's chest. The clock read 6. No one had come to update us on Aaron's progress. Across the waiting room, Samuel sat with his chin resting on his chest, sleeping. I eased from Bryson's embrace. I'm going downstairs and get some breakfast for the three of us. Maybe some coffee will put Samuels in a better mood.
Don't count on it.
Bryson yawned and stretched his arms out in front of his body. A doctor stepped into the room.
For Aaron Burns?
Yes?
Samuel stood alert, faster than I would have thought possible. Bryson and I joined Samuel's. I didn't like the concern in the doctor's expression.
Is there any family we should call?
The doctor asked. I blurted out, his parents passed away.
He has an uncle in California. Otherwise, there's no family.
Samuels glanced between the doctor and me.
She's his girlfriend and I'm his partner. He's a police detective. My partner.
I asked, how is he? Can we see him?
Normally, only family members are allowed to visit the patients in ICU, but in this case, we can make an exception. 2 at a time, and only for 5 minutes. He's in critical condition. We haven't been able to find the cause of infection. We're currently giving him heavy doses of antibiotics. Has he traveled outside of the country in the past 3 weeks?
The doctor glanced between the three of us.
No,
Samuels replied.
It's a good thing he was brought in when he was. His heart stopped twice in the emergency room.
Everyone drew a collective breath. I had a sinking feeling that Aaron's illness had to do with magic. My throat constricted, and tears brimmed in my eyes. It came on so fast. He was fine midday. When we met at 8, he looked worn out. Then he collapsed. The doctor's eyes widened a fraction.
Sepsis can come on fast, but generally not that fast. Was he complaining of any pain, fever, confusion?
Samuels and I shook our heads.
I would try to contact the uncle in California. His situation is touch and go for the time being.
The doctor clasped his hands in front of his body. "Any questions?" I asked, "Can we see him now?"
"Of course. Follow me."
The doctor turned and walked toward the hall. Samuel sat heavily in his chair.
"You two go first. I need a few minutes."
Bryson set his hands on the small of my back and guided me from the room. Samuels had his elbows on his knees and his head cradled in his hands. We hustled to catch up with the doctor, but everything changed to slow motion when the door closed behind us. The doctor guided us into a small cubicle containing Aaron and far too many machines. I stood, unable to move as the beeps and whirls of the machines filled the silence. Aaron had a blue and white tube taped to his mouth, 2 IVs running into his arm, and various wires connecting leads on his chest to a nearby machine. He was nude, except for a small patch of sheet across his midsection. His chest rose and fell in time with the whooshing sound. "He's not breathing on his own?" I whispered as I moved to his side and placed my hand over his. "I don't understand. What happened to him?" Bryson held his hands a few inches over Aaron and moved them in small, slow circles. His eyes closed as he whispered something under his breath. After a moment, he pulled his hands back with a hiss. My heart shattered into splintered pieces. I had caused this. My knees buckled as the room spun too quickly for me to catch my breath. Bryson wrapped his arms around me before I collapsed. Weeping into his chest and unable to form any intelligible thought, I gave myself over to guilt.
"We'll figure this out."
Bryson stroked my back until I pulled myself together.
"Leave me with him for a few minutes."
"What are you going to do?"
"Try to block the flow of magic."
"Wouldn't it be stronger if we did it together?" I grabbed Bryson's hands, desperate to do something useful. This was my fault. My mess to clean up.
"Perhaps, but you're too distraught. Let me try for now."
"No, I can do this. I can help." He drew me to his chest and slid his hand under my hair so that his palm rested on the back of my neck. I couldn't see what he was doing, only the change in his position and the straining of muscles. I closed my eyes and focused on sending my energy through Bryson. Each syllable he spoke was sharp, yet slurred into the next until it sounded more like a whispered song. The beeping from the machines increased in tempo, mirroring the tempo of Bryson's words. My ears burned. I expected to hear one long, steady beat, a flat line. The cadence increased until I couldn't stand it. The sound stopped with a blip and returned to a normal rhythm. Bryson pulled his hand back and kissed the top of my head.
"You were right. We are stronger together."
He released me, only to take my hand and guide me from the cubicle. We exited ICU and stood in the hall. "Will he be all right?" I asked.
"I don't know."
Samuels met us, intelligent cop eyes scanning the situation. He must not have liked what he saw because the color drained from his face. I reached my hand toward him. "Would you like me to go in with you?" Samuels nodded. Bryson took a step to the side.
"I'll go downstairs and get us some breakfast."
Samuels squeezed my hand before releasing it. He squared his shoulders and followed as I pushed the door open and led him to Aaron. Samuels lagged behind a few feet, as if unsure he wanted to see what lay behind the curtain. When he finally saw Aaron, his reaction gutted me. Samuels took Aaron's hand and cried against it, bargaining with God and anyone else who'd listen for his partner's life. I stepped from the space to give him some privacy, but he took my hand before I could retreat.
"Every officer knows ending up here is a possibility every morning when we go to work. This isn't right. I could handle a bullet."
He pleaded with his eyes for me to say something that would make sense of the situation. "I'm sorry." My guilt raged through me. Watching Samuels with Aaron reminded me of my own loss and the desperation that grief brings. Wouldn't I have bargained with the devil to bring Charlie back? Samuel stood but kept a hold of Aaron's hand.
"He's like a kid brother to me, or a son even."
I started to speak but clamped my mouth closed. I needed to say something to help this man. All of this was my fault. "I know what's wrong with him." Samuels turned his head and narrowed his eyes.
"What?"
Why did I open my big mouth? He'd never believe me. Would it be too far of a stretch for him to believe in bad people with bad magic? "Can we talk somewhere private?" The detective nodded and escorted me back to the waiting room. His movements held such authority that I didn't second-guess my decision to spill my guts. At least, not yet. The shift from grieving friend to detective happened so fast, but how could I blame him? I understood his desperate need to understand, to do something to correct the situation. "This is going to sound crazy. Promise to hear me out." I sat in the corner of the waiting room, and Samuels took a seat across from me. "Off the record?"
"Off the record."
He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Aaron's illness is being caused by a conjurer." Samuel shook his head and stood.
"I've seen a lot of strange shit since you've been around, but this is too much."
"Listen to me, please." He motioned for me to continue, and I explained my relationship with Dr. Hicks. Samuels folded his arms.
"Dr. Hicks? The same Dr. Hicks that Aaron is looking for?"
"Yes. Dr. Hicks is missing, and I need to find him." Samuels pinched the bridge of his nose, hard.
"So let me get this straight. You've been fighting some evil spirit, and now it's in Aaron?"
"Yes, and no. It isn't an evil spirit, it's a man. A powerful man who uses dark magic to do bad things."
"The guys you shot?"
Samuels looked at me like I was certifiable. "He was a wolf when I shot him, but turned into a man." He folded his arms and nodded.
"Go on."
"I know it sounds crazy, but think about it. I was shot in the leg. There are police reports and hospital records, but I don't have as much as a scratch on me. You saw my nose broken after that spirit hit me, and now it's healed. Your men reported wolf tracks outside my aunt's house, tracks too big to be a normal wolf. Hell, I was shot in the chest. Do you believe a cast iron skillet could stop the bullet?" Two people sat on the other side of the room. I hoped no one was listening to this conversation.
"Tessa, stop. I believe you. How do you propose we get this guy to stop hurting Aaron?"
"We have to find Dr. Hicks and try to reconnect the bond between him and the conjurer. Then Bryson and I can track him down."
"Oh, yes, Bryson. How does he fit into all of this?"
The skeptical look returned to his eyes.
"He's not your cousin."
"No, he isn't. He's my bodyguard until this mess is sorted out. He can't know I told you this. It would only put all of us in more danger." I hadn't considered Bryson or what he would do if he knew I'd included Samuels in tribal business. This was a bad idea. Very bad. "Bryson has magic, too. He can help keep Aaron alive while we find Dr. Hicks and the conjurer."
"We?"
"I can't do it alone, and Bryson needs to stay close to Aaron. Besides, how am I going to find Dr. Hicks without police help?" It made perfect sense. I didn't like the idea of partnering with Samuels, but what choice did I have?
I must be losing my damned mind. Yeah, okay. I'm in.
Samuel sat back in his chair, staring at me as if I were a specimen under a glass in a laboratory. Chapter 42. When not visiting Aaron, I paced a path in the waiting room. The clock read 6, almost supper time, and I hadn't heard anything from Samuel since he'd left that morning. I second and third guessed myself, but I knew I'd done the right thing. However, I wished I could convince my heart to stop pounding. Everything would work out. It had to.
Are you hungry?
Bryson slumped in his chair. Lack of sleep and the energy expenditures of magic, which we did each time we were permitted to visit with Aaron, were taking their toll on him. A little. We can go downstairs for food after we see Aaron. It's almost time. I fidgeted with my phone. Still no calls.
I can't believe you talked Samuels into helping us find Marvin.
Bryson folded his arms, watching me closely. Like I said, Aaron told him he was missing before he got sick. Maybe this is his way of helping Aaron. The more I lied, the easier it got. Bryson would lock me in my house if he knew what I was up to. Why don't you go in and check on Aaron? I'll call Samuels to see if he's had any luck. Bryson narrowed his eyes as he stood.
I'll be back in 5 minutes.
Thanks, Bryson. He kissed my forehead and headed out of the waiting room. My guilt took the form of a miniature Southern Baptist preacher in the back of my mind, ranting about liars burning in the pits of hell. I started to follow Bryson, to come clean about my deception, but my phone rang. Hello?
Tessa, this is Samuels. How's Aaron?
Samuel sounded as tired as I felt. No change.
I have a lead on Marvin Hicks. His credit card is being used at the Motel 6 in Inverness.
Do you have a room number? Samuel said.
No, he's using his credit card, so he's probably using his real name. I don't think it's a good idea for you to go alone.
He isn't dangerous as long as he's himself. I need to talk to him. Maybe he'll agree to help us and we won't have to force him to cooperate.
You shouldn't go alone. I'll have someone go with you.
Samuel seemed to be debating with himself.
Beecham is at the hospital. I'll have him meet you by the main entrance.
He'll clam up if I show up with the police.
This is non-negotiable. If you leave without him, I will have you arrested.
What for?
Obstructing justice and being an overall pain in the ass.
I'll meet him downstairs. Bye, Samuels. I hung up. One down, one to go, I mumbled to myself. I doubted it would be that easy to convince Bryson that I could be left on my own for a short while. Maybe I should go now, before Bryson came from visiting Aaron? No, bad idea. He'd panic if I disappeared. I needed a plan. Bryson returned to the waiting room and sank into the chair beside me. Dark circles had formed under his eyes. Keeping Aaron alive took more of his energy than I'd realized. Part of me wanted to stay with Bryson, but I knew our best shot at saving Aaron's life was for me to hunt down Dr. Hicks. Bryson? Dottie called. They forgot to pick up May's medication today. I need to run to the pharmacy, then to May's. Can you stay here with Aaron? I won't even get out of the car. I'll run through the drive-thru and have Dottie meet me in the driveway. I slowed my speech and hoped he didn't suspect I'd lied.
I don't like it.
Bryson glanced at the clock.
It's getting late. I'll go. Do you know the spell well enough to do it on your own?
Maybe, but every time I go in there, my brain goes blank. I don't think I can do it by myself. My lower lip quivered. I needed to hurry and get to Inverness or Aaron would never get better.
Fine. Go. But be careful.
Bryson drew me into a hug.
If anything happened to you, I would never forgive myself.
I'll be fine. I felt guilty for lying, but I knew what I had to do. It took every ounce of self-control for me to walk, instead of run, to the main entrance to find Beecham. I looked over my shoulder several times, expecting to see Bryson following me.
Tessa Lamar?
A tall man dressed in plain clothes approached. Yes?
I'm Officer Beecham, but you can call me Greg. I'm off duty.
Nice to meet you. I shook his hand and headed for the exit. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking, and I could barely get the key into the ignition. It'll take an hour or so to drive to Inverness without traffic.
I'm yours for as long as you need me. Samuel said it was important.
I nodded, wondering how long before Bryson would blow up my cell phone. Thankfully, Officer Beecham, Greg, remained quiet during the drive. The silence gave me a chance to think about what to say to Marvin. I figured I had one chance to get him to help, so I needed to get it right. After a lengthy mental debate, I decided to go with honesty and good old-fashioned guilt. I'd tell him Aaron was fighting for his life and Marvin was his only hope of survival. He had to know the conjurer's name and where to find him. My cell phone rang so many times I turned the darn thing off. I would have to face Bryson sooner or later, but there was no sense in giving myself a heart attack every time the phone rang.
Avoiding someone?
Greg motioned to the phone. I don't like to be on the phone while driving, especially with a police officer in my passenger seat. Greg chuckled.
Good point.
There's the hotel. Do you mind waiting in the car while I go upstairs?
Samuel said not to let you out of my sight.
Of course he did. I pulled into the hotel parking lot and drove around the building, hoping to find Marvin's car. Not only did I spot his car, I spotted him. He stood in a doorway paying a pizza man. See? Nothing to worry about. Luck is on my side. That's him. I angled into a parking spot and waited until the delivery man pulled away.
I'm still going with you.
Greg and I went upstairs to Marvin's room. I knocked quickly before I could chicken out. Marvin opened the door and immediately tried to close it again. I shoved my foot into the open space and saw stars when Marvin crushed my foot between the door and the frame. Ow! Dang it! Marvin, please let me in. I need to talk to you. My foot smarted when I put weight on it. The move always worked in movies. Never once did the hero get his foot crushed in the door. I pounded on the door. Marvin, I think you broke my foot. Let me in. I need ice. He opened the door a fraction and looked out as I rubbed my foot. My flip-flop hung precariously from my toes. Before Marvin could slam it shut again, Greg threw his shoulder against it and pushed his way into the room.
Who is this? How did you find me? You need to leave.
Marvin glanced outside, shut the door, and locked it. People are worried about you. Didn't you think someone would file a missing persons report when you disappeared? You used your credit card to pay for the room. I sat on the edge of the bed closest to the door and inspected my foot.
What do you want?
Marvin glanced from me to Greg to the door. Greg, would you please wait outside? I need to ask Marvin some questions.
I'll be right outside.
Greg frowned and stepped out. Marvin went into the bathroom and turned the water on. I assumed he needed a minute to collect himself. I need the name of the conjurer and an address. One of my friends is in the hospital. His magic is making him sick. I wouldn't ask, but the guy's a cop, and, well, I would hate to get his cop friends involved in all this. I looked up at the exact moment Dr. Marvin Hicks clocked me upside the head with a short, yet surprisingly heavy, glass from the bathroom. I stood with my hand on my head. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, why in the hell did you do that? I pulled my hand away, thankful I wasn't bleeding. Marvin darted for the door and tried to wrench it open. I tackled him before he could turn the knob. Surprised by my strength, I had him pinned to the floor, straddling him before either of us knew what happened. In the course of the struggle, Marvin split his lip, his teeth watery red as he growled. Only then did it occur to me that he could easily shift into a giant bear and rip me in two. I did the only thing I could think to do. I slammed my fist into his nose with everything I had. My eyes widened when I realized his nose sat more to the right than it had been before I punched him. "You stupid jerk! People are dying because of you. Tell me his name." Greg pounded on the door.
Tessa, are you okay?
"I'm fine." Marvin struggled beneath me, and I hit him again. "Tell me, or I'll shift and light you up like a campfire."
I can't say his true name. It may summon him.
Marvin stopped struggling, and the energy around him changed. He was trying to shift. Panic rose like bile in my throat, yet words danced through my mind in a swirling pattern that reminded me of the spell Bryson had spoken over Aaron. I opened my mouth, and the syllables fell from my lips. The voice that came forth sounded nothing like my own. Marvin stilled beneath me. If his eyes grew any wider, they'd pop out of his head.
How?
"Tell me his English name and where to find him." I leaned closer, and the smell of blood in the air made my stomach growl. Marvin must have gotten the hint because he started talking.
Paul Woods. His name is Paul Woods, and he lives in unincorporated Ocala.
I climbed off Marvin and shook out my hand. Punching someone in the nose actually hurt both the punchee and the puncher. Who knew? Marvin rolled to his side, his fingers probing his nose. I shook my head as I stepped over him and opened the door. "I'm sorry about your nose. All you had to do was tell me his name." I walked to the stairs with Greg close behind.
What happened? Are you okay?
He set his hand on my shoulder. "Other than my foot getting slammed in the door, I'm fine."
Your knuckles are bleeding.
"It's not my blood." Greg shook his head and didn't ask any more questions. Part of me felt like a badass, but the saner part of me wanted to vomit. I made it to my car, willing my tears not to flow. I'd never hit someone before. My foot and hand took turns pulsing in time with the beat of my heart. The wisest thing to do was get the heck out of there, except it was a bad idea to be behind the wheel in my current state. I could ask Greg to drive, but then he'd know I was hurt. If I didn't get us out of there, Marvin would shift into his animal form. The thought of being eaten galvanized me. I didn't dare risk using magic to stop him from shifting twice in one night. I didn't want to face the consequences if the spell didn't work. I drove a few miles and parked in front of the Russell Stover candy factory. What I wouldn't have given for a couple of pounds of chocolate right then, but adding breaking and entering to assault and forced entry was probably not a good idea. "Would you mind driving?"
I wondered when you'd ask. Your foot has to be killing you.
Greg opened his door. "Thanks for not insisting on driving. I needed time to cool off."
I've been married almost 20 years. I know when to push and when to back off.
I smiled. "I appreciate it. I need to make a call."
I need to take a leak. Be right back.
He climbed out of the car and disappeared into the darkness. I pulled my phone from my bag and called Samuel's. My muscles felt like rubber. The adrenaline rush of beating the snot out of Marvin had left me exhausted. "This is Tessa. I got a name and city." Samuels whispered, "Are you all right?" "Oh, no. Are you at the hospital?" My fatigue disappeared as another shot of adrenaline coursed through my veins.
Yes, sir,
Samuels said louder. "Paul Woods. He's in Ocala, probably in the country somewhere. I doubt he would want neighbors." I hesitated, collecting my thoughts. "I got my foot slammed in a door and hurt my hand on Dr. Hick's face. Otherwise, I'm safe. Beecham and I are on our way back.
Roger that. What time is the meeting tomorrow?
Meeting? It dawned on me that he was pretending to speak to someone from the office. He wasn't alone. An hour or so? Is Bryson with you?
Yes, sir. I understand the situation is hot.
Great. How's Aaron? Tears fell to my cheeks, and for once I didn't try to stop them.
There's no change in Detective Burns' condition. I'll keep you posted.
I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in the parking lot as gallons of pent-up tears spilled down my face. The screen on my phone told me I'd missed 16 calls and had half as many voice messages, along with a handful of texts. I scrolled through several texts from Bryson, each growing in urgency. The voicemails were more of the same. May had left 2 messages. Great. I put my forehead on the steering wheel and closed my eyes.
Tessa, where in the hell are you?
Bryson roared through the phone. I'm in Wildwood.
What are you doing in Wildwood?
His volume decreased to a more civil level.
Are you all right?
I found Marvin. I'm fine, just shaken up. I got the name. I listened as Bryson growled to himself, or me, or both.
You lied to me?
I had to. You never would have let me leave. His name is Paul Woods, and he lives in Ocala. Bryson interrupted me, yelling again.
Get back here now. Don't go after this guy. Do you hear me? Get back here now.
I'm coming. I turned and caught movement on my left. In the distance, a wolf howled. I dropped the phone and turned the key as claws scraped down the driver's side window. The amulet turned cold enough to hurt my chest. I could hear Bryson shouting through the phone, and I screamed, "Wolves!" The driver's side window burst in a shower of glass, and I hit the gas pedal. The car lurched forward instead of backward, slamming into a light pole. Reverse. Blackness filled my vision. Chapter 43. The smell of litter boxes pulled me from my concussion-induced sleep. My hands were bound behind my back, and my feet were tied. The concrete floor beneath me was cold. I had no idea where I was or how I'd gotten there. My nose twitched before the sneezes took control of my body. Someone stirred beside me, and I stilled, only to be taken with another round of sneezes. A male voice whispered in the dark room.
Tessa?
Who's there? I scooted away from the other person. Greg?
It's Marvin. Is that you, Tessa?
His nasally voice reminded me I'd broken his nose. Yes? I scooted farther away, but not far enough. Marvin kicked out in my direction and caught me in the middle of my back.
Stupid bitch.
I grunted and scooted until I reached a wall. I focused on the coil of heat in my gut, trying to shift forms and escape the bonds.
It's no use. He bound you from shifting, like you did me.
Marvin tried to kick me again, but his foot barely brushed my thigh. Stop kicking me! My voice sounded as nasal as his. My entire face itched. It felt as though I'd been dipped in water and rolled in cat hair. 7 sneezes in rapid succession left me no choice but to wipe snot on my shoulder. Marvin whispered,
Stop sneezing. He'll hear you.
I'm allergic to cats. I pulled on my bonds until they loosened a fraction. Where's Greg?
The guy that was with you earlier?
Yes. Have you seen him? He got out of the car to pee before the wolves.
No idea where he is.
I didn't remember hearing any screams. Maybe Greg was safe. Why are we here?
Why do you think he's going to kill us?
Anger thickened Marvin's voice. If he wanted to kill us, he would have already, right?
Not if he wanted to make it as slow and painful as possible.
Why would he do that?
Are you that stupid? He wants power. He planned for me to take Charlie's position, but your Firebird made that impossible. Now, he has access to more magic than a seat on the council. He has you.
I don't understand. My gut clenched. If he wants to use me, why would he kill me?
He doesn't want to use you. He wants your magic, and the only way to get it is through a ritual, one ending with your heart on a plate.
The mental image his words created left me disoriented and determined to break free. Until that moment, it hadn't occurred to me I should be afraid. Between sneezing and getting kicked, I hadn't thought of much. I pulled at the ties on my wrists until my skin wore thin, but couldn't get enough of a gap to pull my hand out. Judging by the way the material stuck to my skin, it had to be duct tape, which meant I could chew it apart. Marvin, chew the tape on my wrists. Free me, and I'll free you. I scooted toward him.
Stay away from me.
He kicked me again, this time making contact with my arm. I yelped and moved away. After another sneezing fit, I tried to stand. My foot ached from being slammed in the door, but now my knee throbbed as well. Whatever the cause, it took several attempts and painful falls before I stood.
What are you doing?
Marvin hissed from behind me. I ignored him and crouched down, pulling my bound hands down as far as I could. The first 2 times I wobbled and nearly fell again. I managed to bring my hands under my butt. I fell back on purpose and pulled my legs through my arms. With my hands in front of my body, I chewed at the duct tape.
I'm going to start screaming if you don't stop whatever it is you're doing,
Marvin whispered. I ignored him, knowing good and well that he didn't want Mr. Paulwoods down here any more than I did. Another few minutes and my hands separated with a quick jerk. I felt around the tape on my ankles until I found the seam, picking at it with my fingernail. Another sneeze tickled my nose. I scrubbed my face and pulled the neck of my t-shirt up to cover the lower half of my face. Returning my attention to the tape on my ankles, I continued to pick at it. At this rate, I would never get loose. What if I took my jeans off? No, that wouldn't work. I still wouldn't get my feet loose, not to mention I didn't want to run around without pants. Are we in a basement? Are there basements in Florida? It had to be some sort of shed or utility room, musty with a concrete floor. I took Marvin's silence as confirmation. I stood and hopped until I found another wall. Using it for support, I moved around the perimeter of the room until I found a basket of clothes. Laundry room, I whispered. I found a pair of jeans with a zipper and sat, using the zipper teeth to saw through the duct tape. It was slow, but faster than picking at it with my nails. I nearly cried out in triumph when I freed my feet. I considered untying Marvin, but said the hell with it, no telling what he would do to me if I set him loose. Likely, he'd get us caught, and that wouldn't end well. I felt around until my fingers landed on a door frame. I hesitated to open it, unsure if it opened into a garage or a house. Judging by the complete darkness in the room, I doubted it contained a window to climb out of. The door was the only option. I turned the knob until it clicked and pushed it open a fraction of an inch. Everything on the outside was almost as dark as the inside. Marvin stirred when I opened the door wider. Without thinking, I slipped out and closed the door behind me. I could hear Marvin moving, but he hadn't called out. I eased forward a few feet. Light came from under another door. I crept in the opposite direction. Using my hands to guide me, I felt along the wall, hoping to find a door or window. I came to another door and slid my fingers down the frame until I found a deadbolt. My pulse sped up. Only outside doors had deadbolts. Trying to be as quiet as possible, I turned the lock and opened the door. Footsteps echoed from somewhere behind me, and a cold rush of fear flooded my senses. I slid through the door and closed it behind me. I ran as fast as my body would move. My knees screamed as I ran, but I refused to slow down. Once I made it to the tree line, I slowed a bit, remembering the wolves in the parking lot. Were there wolves out here, or had the conjurer sent them home after they found me? I didn't have time for an anxiety attack. I continued to move deeper into the woods. It was dark, but I could make out some of my surroundings by the light of the moon. I had to be in the middle of nowhere to be able to see so many stars. I reached for my magic, but found only a cold knot of fear where the heat had been. I'd grown accustomed to the magic inside me and missed the familiar heat. I couldn't outrun them, not without the ability to shift. Voices carried from the direction of the house, and I stilled. Popping and tearing sounds filled my ears, but it wasn't until I heard growls that I realized they had shifted into animal form. I needed something I could use as a weapon. The thought of the wolves came back into my mind, and I started to hyperventilate. The last thing on earth I wanted to do was be torn apart and eaten alive by wolves. I needed to get off the ground and hide. I reached for a thick, low-hanging branch, set my foot on the trunk, and hoisted myself up. Once I gained a footing on the branch, I climbed higher and higher until the branches were too flimsy to hold my weight. Curled against the tree trunk, I stopped and listened as the noises came closer.